Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the eBPF book club here on Cisco DevNet. This time we have Bill Mulligan as our guest. Hi, Bill, Jesus. Welcome, everyone. Thanks, Bill, for joining us. We're on episode 3, right? We're going to talk about the Illustrated Children's Guide to eBPF. We've had Liz Rice before talking about eBPF in general, and then we've had Nico talking about Kubernetes, networking, and Cilium. So now we're just taking it a bit on a funner side, let's say, and talking about children's book that, Bill, you've written, you've co-authored. So first of all, a quick intro, right? Tell us a bit about yourself. What do you do at Isovalent?
Sure. So what I work on at Isovalent is building communities. And specifically, I'm focused on building communities around both the Cilium project and eBPF as a technology. And so that covers a lot of different things. But what I really like to say that I do is I help enable other people to do what they really want to do. And so I think a lot of community building is about helping people find something that excites them and unlocking ways for them to do that. And when people start working together and doing things that they're excited about, I think that's when community really starts to form. And so I'm really trying to do that around like Cilium and eBPF and growing both of those communities. And there is some overlap in between them, but I would also say that they are two separate communities.
Perfect. And how many years you've been doing this? I mean, you guys have been successful at it.
Yeah, so I've been at Isovalent and now part of Cisco for about 3.5 years now.
Okay.
And before that, I was working at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So that's the open source foundation that hosts the Cilium project and a lot of other cloud native projects like Kubernetes, Envoy, Prometheus, OpenTelemetry. So I was also doing a lot of community stuff there too. So Cilium was just kind of like my specialization, let's say, my master's of cloud native and community building.
Gotcha. So how did a book come around, right? Because I mean, the illustrated guide, right, for eBPF, I know, tell us a bit about that. How did you decide to write it? It's a fantastic book, folks, by the way. If you haven't read or seen it, Jesus can also testify to that. We're loving this book.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the thing why I really like working in open source is because you're always learning from the people around you, right? You're always like sharing ideas, collaborating, borrowing things from other projects, from other people. And so I can't say the children's book is even my idea. The original children's book was the Illustrated Children's Guide to Kubernetes. And that came from the team at Deus Labs, who's one of the kind of like early companies in the Kubernetes and cloud native space. And they're looking for how can we explain what this kind of complex technology is to someone who's brand new to it. And it's kind of cool because for me, like actually one of the first things that I read when I was getting into cloud native, like before I was kind of like working in technology, I was in biochemistry and then I was in social science. So I don't have any background in technology. And I joined a startup that was doing like this Kubernetes thing. And I had no idea what Kubernetes was. And so the first thing that I do is I start Googling, like what is Kubernetes? And this YouTube video pops up and it's like the Illustrated Children's Guide to Kubernetes. And I was like, sounds like something for me, right? And so that actually was one of the first resources I used to get into Kubernetes and cloud native. And I found it really helpful as, kind of a, let's say, like a wade into the waters, not just diving into the deep end because I didn't have any background in this. And it was a good kind of like gentle introduction. And so when I came over to Isovalent and started thinking about like, okay, eBPF is also, this Linux kernel level technology, this super complex thing most people don't even, dive into. How can we start breaking this down? And I thought back into like how I first came into Kubernetes and cloud native. And I was like, I actually think this kind of like children's book is a great way to have like a gentle introduction into a very complex technology. And so that's kind of where the idea came from. And then I reached out to the author of the original book, Karen Chu, and I was like, hey, can you tell me a little bit about your process? Worked with her a little bit around developing that, came up with the storyline with my co-author, Quentin, worked with our graphic designer, Vadim, to come up with like, some of the images and put that all together to create the book. Yeah, that's kind of the story behind it.
Fantastic. Yeah, because I mean, sometimes in technology, right, we're so focused that it is difficult to simplify what you're working on to a level that you can explain it to a child. So to see folks doing that is not easy, is what I'm trying to say, right? So how do you approach this? Like, what's your thought process when you jump into a new technology, for example, right, let's say eBPF? Like, how to even get started?
Yeah, so I was lucky. There's this website called eBPF.io, which is I'm now a maintainer of, and it had this page like, what is eBPF? And it kind of walks through all the different pieces of what the project is. And I think in the same way, like the illustrated Kubernetes guide, it's like, this is what a pod is, this is what a namespace is. Like, okay, well, in eBPF, what are the kind of like most important things? Well, this is an eBPF program, this is the eBPF verifier, this is the JIT compiler. You kind of break down what each of those things, and you come up with a way to explain what that is as an analogy. And so we kind of broke the writing in two parts. So, and in the book, like one side is like the children's story, and the other side is like the explanation of the technology. And so I wrote kind of the explanation of the technology, a lot based on what we'd already written on the website on the whatisebpf.io page. And Quentin really did a great job with the story. He's really creative when it comes to ideas and stuff like that. So yeah, we kind of broke it down into those two parts. We were like, okay, what are the key parts of eBPF that people need to know about as a technology? And wrote down like, how do we explain that in like a couple sentences, very simple words, and then created like, kind of the analogy, the story half of it on top of that.
Gotcha. Should we show folks the book actually and just parse it for people that haven't seen it yet?
Sure. Yeah.
Let me do that. There we go.
Okay, yeah, so this is eBPF.io, the website that I want. And if you want to get a free digital copy of it, you can just go to Learn and then go Children's Guide to eBPF, and it'll pull up a PDF of the book for you right now. So you can see this is front cover. I think it's like a very fun, like whimsical way. You're like, okay, it's not this like, like Linux kernel mailing list, like hacking things together. It's like, a fun, approachable technology that we can get excited about. And I think that's what we were trying to do with the book is how can we make this complex thing approachable? And yeah, so it was written by Quentin and myself, and yeah. And so as you can see here, like kind of what we did. So this is the kind of like the analogy, the story page, and this is the introduction. And then the second part is like this, like the technology page. And throughout the book, we're going back and forth between them. And so like the children's book side explains, something that would be interesting to, I don't know, your 5-year-old, your 6-year-old, something that can be like, wow, these are great pictures. I love the storyline, blasting off through outer space. And then the technology side is talking about like, okay, from what we just said on the storybook side, how does that translate into the actual technology? And so like looking at, kind of like this first page as an example, we're talking about like the starship, like flying through the nebulae, right? And so it's like a spacecraft, right? And on the technology side, we can think about that as like our machines, right? There's, you're up in the cockpit, you're deploying all your programs, you're in user space, but the place that you don't want to go to is the engine room, right? A lot of things are going on there. It's like critical for driving the actual spaceship and the machine. But it's, like a very critical part of the system, right? If the engine goes out, then you're not blasting off through space anymore. You're just like stuck in space. And so then on the technology side, we said, okay, like user space where people deploy applications is like cockpit. It's safe to do that. You're driving the ship. But if you go into kernel space, that's where all the critical systems are, like the files, the memory, networking, access to different processes. And that's where we really control things. And so you can kind of see there's the story part, and then there's the technology side. And hopefully it breaks it down in a way that people find interesting.
Yeah, I will add that even though it's a children book, I mean, I feel like it's also very helpful for adults. When I was looking at the book, when I was trying to learn eBPF, I was surprised, to be honest. I was not expecting to learn so much from a children book. So I really highly recommend to everybody just to take a look. And also, it's pretty short, and that's what I like. It's pretty short, to the point, with great images. I actually use it for my Cisco Live session, so really recommend to everybody to take a look at it.
Ah, cool. That's awesome to hear. Yeah. And so maybe I can walk you through like a bit of like how it goes so you can get an understanding, maybe if you're not familiar with eBPF, like how the technology works. And so like kind of as I was saying before, like user space, all safe, happy, but kernel space, like really difficult to modify. And so we had kernel modules before, but then we can have things like the CrowdStrike incident where we take down all of technology worldwide. Obviously, that's not a good thing. You don't want to panic the kernel because it is like a critical system. But if you can't modify the kernel, kind of this core part of the system, it kind of slows down innovation. You can't add technology at the same rate. So like, how can we kind of change what that does, right? What's the idea to be able to make it safe to do that? And that's kind of where eBPF comes in. So eBPF allows us to bring innovation back into the kernel in a safe way. It brings programmability, it brings flexibility into the kernel. And what eBPF does is it allows you to insert programs at specific hook points within the kernel. So as something's, for example, your application is making a system call into the kernel, as a certain system call is happening, an eBPF program can run on that specific event and take an action. So right, it's modifying what's actually happening in the kernel. And this brings programmability and flexibility back into the kernel. And this is really important because like Linux kernel is a 30-year-old technology. It's deployed on literally billions of devices worldwide. It's not something that moves very fast. And if you want to get something into like the mainline kernel, it can take a year, and then to get to actually like something that's deployed in production, it can take another 5, 6, 7 years, right? And it's a really long innovation cycle. And suddenly with eBPF, you can deploy something safely into production without rebooting your machine, and you can modify what's actually happening on the fly, right? So you can experiment, you can innovate instead of in hours, instead of years. And that's a huge difference in terms of what we can think about, how we can architect our systems, what we can like put into it. And what's exciting for me about eBPF right now is that I think it's going to be kind of like this generational technology. It's going to be kind of like how we think about and architect our infrastructure systems for the next 10 years. There'll be a technology after eBPF. There's always another technology, right? But I think this is the moment for eBPF, and I think it's a really exciting time to get into it. So that's like, the high level vision, right? And then, so the question is like, how does it actually work? And so now we're talking about like, okay, well, like these little bees have these like safety things and they're going into the engine room, right? Then that's exactly what eBPF does. I'm talking about like, okay, well, you can just add functionality on the fly, but the key part about eBPF is that it does that in a safe way. And the way that it does that is it has an eBPF verifier. So it checks that all the programs are safe to run. It's not just letting you, throw anything into the kernel and be like, okay, like let's reprogram it for fun. Saying, okay, is it actually going to be safe? Will it not crash the system? Is it not doing things it's not supposed to? And what it'll do is it'll reject programs that aren't safe for the system. The other thing on top of that is it's going to compile the code into like natively compiled kernel code. So it runs like just as fast as natively compiled kernel code. So instead of having like this really slow code, it's running just as fast as if it was in the kernel. Then, the next thing beyond that is kind of talking about like eBPF. What I just said is like interesting for the next 10 years, but what people don't realize is eBPF is already 10 years old. It's 10 years in the making. And like the original eBPF instruction set just had 4K instructions. It was very limited in what it could do, obviously, because it was concerned about safety. That was like the key thing. How can we innovate safely? But over 10 years, the community has built out this amazing infrastructure in terms of different ways to hack in the engine room, right? So adding things like increasing the instruction set size, adding helper functions, allowing you to do tail calls, really increasing the things that you're able to do with eBPF, right? And that's over a decade in the making. And so that's why I think eBPF is super exciting right now, because we have a decade of experience, a decade of doing things, and that's why it's going to be exciting for, I think, at least the next decade. Yeah, and then we got like halfway through the book, and we're like, let's do like a really big one across both pages. We can show, here you are up in user space in the control room, and then there's like the bees back in the engine room. And we start to introduce some of the other characters that you probably know from other technology, like Goldie the gopher. And then so we start talking about like, okay, so that's like a little bit how eBPF works. How is it actually bringing benefits to people, right? Because that's what we're trying to do with technology. We're not, just doing it for fun. Like, what are the actual benefits to this? And so, like, for instance,
for fun too, but yeah, there's a benefit.
Yeah, fun too. Okay, yeah. But it also, like, there's the people that implemented Snake in eBPF or implemented the Enigma machine. Yes, that's not, maybe it doesn't have a real purpose, but it is quite fun to be able to do. I'm still waiting for someone to port Doom to eBPF, but I think it's coming pretty soon.
Can you imagine that Snake game running at like line rate speed, directly CPU in the kernel?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's the fun thing. Like, eBPF has a lot of like interesting like use cases in gaming. I've seen people using eBPF to protect their Minecraft servers, their Ubiquity servers. I've seen it you can rewrite a scheduler so that you can do have a higher frames per second and like throughput. You have like much better scheduling on your machine. Like, there's a lot of things that are also fun to do with eBPF, and it makes you have a better experience gaming too. But then kind of we walk through some of the use cases. So the first one is like around networking. This is a lot what we do with Cilium, is using eBPF to rewrite the whole, not the whole, parts of the Linux kernel networking stack better. So my colleague Daniel Borkman, like one of the most interesting things he's working on right now is NetKit, which makes container networking as fast as host networking. And then that's been deployed now at ByteDance, which is TikTok and Meta, like Facebook. And they're having huge performance improvements. And then now he's also bringing that technology back into VMs. So, modernizing an old technology, I think that's going to be a huge story going forwards, and like quite a cool use case for eBPF and networking. eBPF has a lot of great observability benefits too. You can like peer really deep into the kernel. If you've ever seen like flame graphs of doing like continuous profiling, this is a really good example of what eBPF can do. This really fine granular data that you can't get outside of the kernel. And then the last one is around like security, right? You can see everything that's happening within your system and be able to pull out any insights that you want to. And the other thing is being able to filter all of that. You don't have to look through all the different logs. I think a lot of people kind of see that there's this trade-off between like security and like usability. And like a lot of times there's like, okay, if we monitor everything, like, yes, we can see everything, but then it costs a lot. But the great thing about eBPF is that it's event-driven. And so what it's only looking for specific events. You're not looking for every single file access. You're only looking for when somebody accesses the passwords file, right? And it's going to be a lot lower than every single file access. And so the actual CPU consumption and like the overhead in terms of memory and CPU is a lot lower. And that's great for the performance side of eBPF. Yeah. And then we're talking about like some of the other things like CoRE, which is compiler run everywhere. So being able to use eBPF programs across multiple different kernel types. And then also like all of the different helper libraries that you can write eBPF in. So being able to write things in Go and C or in Rust, there's lots of different ways to write eBPF programs to modify how the kernel works. And then, yeah, we just kind of had like a summary of like there's a lot of great things happening in the ecosystem, and it's going to be a great next decade of innovation. And that's, kind of a little bit about the very, very brief introduction to eBPF from the children's book.
Yeah, very brief or very helpful. So, I mean, because you cover pretty much all major aspects of the technology. And like you said, Bill, it's been around, right? It's a mature technology at this point. And I was surprised reading about eBPF because, I mean, I knew BPF all the way back in the 90s when they were trying to build firewalls with it. But then as it evolved, right, I was really surprised to see that actually Linus allowed this technology because it's a fantastic technology, right? So it's like, how did they convince Linus, right, to allow this? Because it gives you access directly into the kernel. But then reading about the verifier, right, the just-in-time compiler, like all the technologies that are around it to make it secure and safe. And then the 10 years behind, right, that we have at this point is definitely a technology that's been trialed and has been proven to work fantastically well. And fun fact, right, I mean, Meta, we were talking about them, is using eBPF in all their load balancers, right? They have a eBPF-based load balancer. So all traffic going to Facebook, for example, from all over the world, billions of people every day accessing Facebook, right? Every single packet, every single stream of data goes through an eBPF load balancer at the end of the day. So that's just telling you the scalability of the technology, right? And the power that comes with it. So it's if you're new to eBPF, definitely check it out. If you're into networking, if you're into security, if you're into system administration, if you want to lock down servers, then this is definitely the technology. And I totally agree with you, Bill, as for the next at least 10 years, this will be at the forefront of networking specifically. That's why Cisco bought Isovalent at the end of the day and Cilium, and we'll see integrations with Cisco hardware coming up, I'm sure. But yeah, just a fantastic technology.
Yeah. And if I can promote one more thing, if you want to hear the backstory, you're like, how did Linus let this into the kernel?
Yes.
A really great resource is the eBPF documentary. So you can also find out on ebpf.io. And this gives, I think, like a really
proposal has
overview of the backstory of, how did it get merged into the kernel? And it's like half an hour, like Netflix style documentary talking about, how did eBPF come to be? And it gives you a little insight into not only the technology, but also the humans behind it too.
Yeah, I also watched the documentary and it was really, really nice. I don't know, when you are drinking some coffee or other kind of drinks, probably it's a good time to watch this documentary. Bill, one question, because something when I was starting with eBPF that caught my eye was eBPF sounds super nice, super good, but how do I get started? It's like I install eBPF on my computer, or I write the eBPF code, or I guess a solution that already works with eBPF. What would be like recommendation that you consider for our users to get started, to learn more?
Yeah. So there's a couple different resources. So let's see if I can find the blog post that I wrote about this. So actually, one thing that I really believe is the great thing why eBPF for everyone, right? We were talking about, you're giving an example of Facebook, but another example I like to give is every single Android phone in the world uses eBPF to process network statistics. 90% of traffic coming out of Google data center is also processed by eBPF, right? You're already using eBPF, you're already benefiting from eBPF. But the great thing is that means you might not have to care about it, right? I don't think it's the same way of programming the Linux kernel. How many Linux kernel teams do you have in the world? Not that many, but you still get the benefits of running Linux, right? And so just because you aren't like specifically programming eBPF programs, you can still benefit from it. Like the example I like to give, like, there's so many companies around the world that use Cilium as their CNI, right? But most of those companies aren't writing any eBPF programs, but they still benefit it by using the technology that has adopted eBPF. So Cilium is a great example of how you can get started with eBPF without having to write any eBPF code, right? So I think what I would actually recommend for most people is go to a product, a technology that's leveraging eBPF underneath and see the benefits that it brings. That's the easiest way to do it. But if you actually want to dive into the code, there's a lot of great resources on eBPF.io to help you get started too. So there's the What is eBPF page, like I was talking about before. It walks you through kind of like what I was saying in the book in a little bit longer form content. And then there's actually some labs too. And these are, how do you write hello world in eBPF, right? And so there's a couple different examples that you can have here. And what I like about these labs is they're actually like live hands-on environments that will walk you through what it's like to actually write an eBPF program. We have another one in development, but I don't want to leak what that one's going to be. But for now, it's just the getting started with eBPF ones, but there's another cool one coming out pretty soon. And then on top of that, there's a lot of experts in eBPF at Isovalent, and we have a lot of great resources for that. So some of the labs that we have, but then there's also a couple different books. So we talked about the Illustrated Children's Guide to eBPF. You already had Liz on talking about probably what is eBPF, and also her book Learning eBPF. And we also have Security Observability with eBPF. So lots of different books to get started here. And if you just go to the Isovalent website, you can download and get started with all of these for free.
Fantastic. Okay, so getting started, we have the book, we have the books, right? We have the videos you showed, Bill. I know you've been to events, there's recording, you have your GitHub, right? I've seen links over there to all your past recording sessions that you've had. So is that, you want to mention that also, your GitHub?
Sure. Yeah. If you go to my GitHub profile and it's just like X Mulligan, then you can see all my different conference talks, and there's a couple in here. The one you're probably looking for is Buzzing Across the eBPF Landscape into the Hive. Gives you kind of a quick overview of the ecosystem, where we've been and where we're heading next. That's a good one. You can see the documentary out here. A couple of the other blog posts I've written on eBPF, some of my other podcast appearances. Yeah, I think two of my favorite ones were our April Fool's blog posts. So announcing eBPF 2.0, Excel BPF. I thought that was a pretty funny one. And for the networking audience, I really like this. Yeah. So yeah, before Wi-Fi, there was Ethernet. Before Ethernet, there was Token Ring. And before Token Ring, there was Token Ring.
This is hilarious. You guys are so creative.
Yeah. So I would recommend those too, but don't take them too seriously.
That's
all right.
amazing.
So we've talked about eBPF right in the Linux kernel. I know there's been projects around to have eBPF on the Microsoft on the Windows kernel also. Like, what's happening there? Do you know? Like, what's the status?
Yeah, they're making progress on that. And actually, Cilium's eBPF Go library actually just added support for eBPF on Windows. A lot of that is right now around the security. How can we have like a common way to secure Linux and Windows-based hosts? So we're doing a lot with the Cilium subproject Tetragon to bring like eBPF security to Windows hosts. So I think you'll hear a lot more about that coming forwards. But yeah, the project is still progressing too.
Perfect. And then there's a question. Sorry, go ahead, Jesus.
Actually, it was about the question. So
Okay.
I see somebody's asking, can eBPF be used in Cisco's DevNet sandbox environment for network monitoring, security, and performance analysis? And I think the answer can be, yeah, maybe we are already working on something like that. The conversation has been very interesting with the Isovalent team. So yeah, we already have some ideas flowing around. So stay tuned about it.
But before we get there, right, we do have dev boxes. So in most of the sandboxes that we have in DevNet, we actually have a Linux, we call it a dev box, which is just, you can think of it as a jump box, right? It's like a terminal server that you can connect, and you have access, SSH access, or you can open web pages in it. It's for testing purposes. And those are Linux based. And if it's Linux based in 2025, it has eBPF enabled by default. So as long as you have root access on that machine, on that server, then you have access to eBPF automatically, right? So I'd say before we get a dedicated sandbox for eBPF specifically, you can kind of take advantage of the dev boxes that we already have. And if you manage to get root access on them, then yes, you get access eBPF and develop and run your own eBPF programs in there. But yeah, good question.
Bill, one question. I also see that you are part of the eBPF Foundation governing board. So I'm just curious, what do you do there? I mean, what are your responsibilities, or do you work on the future of eBPF? Yeah, I don't know what the governing board does, so that's why I wanted to know.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the eBPF Foundation is a really great resource for the community. It's a foundation just focused on the upstream project. So it did things like help fund the eBPF documentary. It created a state of the eBPF report. If you see at the top here, it did an eBPF threat model. It paid for a third-party security audit of the eBPF verifier. We actually just closed the applications last week. The foundation funds a lot of academic research into eBPF, future use cases, what are kind of like bleeding edge tech, like ways we can deploy and improve eBPF. It funds statement of works. So how can we improve eBPF upstream when no one specific company is invested in making this, but it'd be really good for the ecosystem. So the foundation funds specific statement of works to be done in the upstream kernel. And we have a couple new reports that we're going to be launching this year. And then also we do a bunch of case studies too. So here is about ByteDance. So the company behind TikTok, for instance, the benefits that they saw from using eBPF to enhance container networking. So this is the NetKit making container networking as fast as host networking. Or another case study that we saw is from Meta, and they were talking about how profiling with eBPF allowed them to, in some cases, reduce server demands by up to 20%. Right. So these are the benefits that you're seeing from eBPF. And so the foundation does both like upstream development, like how can we improve the upstream community through statement of works? How can we fund, like the next use cases through academic research? And how can we make the community bigger through the case studies, showing the benefits of it, through things like the State of eBPF report, by funding the eBPF documentary? How can we actually promote that? And then the last thing is, at the end of the day, any community, what they're really trying to do is bring people together. And so funding a lot of the conferences and the face-to-face meeting of the eBPF developers to make sure people still have that, kind of human interaction and the human side of the technology too.
That's very, very interesting. And actually, if folks, they want to continue looking at eBPF, where they can see, for example, I don't know, events that are going to happen, if maybe there's one event close to them. So how can get that information?
Yeah. So if you go to ebpf.io, we have an events tab. And so you can see all the different events. So the ones that are coming up, for example, there's SIGCOM, which is like a more academic conference happening in Portugal this fall. There's a couple of meetups around the world. There's one in Japan. There's also one in Vienna. And there's also Linux Plumbers Conference, which is going to be happening in Tokyo in December. So those are kind of like the next ones. And then BPF Summit also happens once a year. And so they'll be happening next spring too. So yeah, lots of different places to catch the eBPF community.
Fantastic. Okay, so then what's coming next, Bill? I know you're working on another book. Have I heard that right? Or
yeah, that's correct. So as you said, like people like the breakdown of collect and flex technologies. So it's not going to be eBPF this time. It's going to be on Cilium, the other project I work on. So the illustrated children's guide to Cilium is going to be coming out in the fall for KubeCon Atlanta.
Nice. All right. So any other things that we want to cover?
I feel like we've covered a lot.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
So no, I'm super excited to see what's coming up with eBPF, Cilium, and all the other projects that will spawn up with eBPF, I'm sure, in the future. In the meantime, like you've seen eBPF.io, that's pretty much your web page. You find learning content, events, the book that we've talked about today. You can actually access it there also. Learning eBPF, what is eBPF with from Liz Rice. There you can also find them in there. The foundation that we briefly touched upon, blogs that Bill and the team are writing, the community tab, like right, all of the content, and also keep an eye on developer.cisco.com, where we have also eBPF content, learning labs, maybe a sandbox. I know Jesus, you were talking about maybe we'll have a dedicated sandbox for eBPF in the future where you can reserve your own environment and just go wild, test your own eBPF programs, develop them. But yeah, any final words, you guys, Jesus, Bill, for wrap up?
For my side, really take a look at the book. The children book is super good. It helped me a lot. So yeah, take advantage of it.
Don't be deceived. It's not only for children, right? So
yeah, exactly.
it's very useful. It's very informative. Like we've gone through a bit through it. Bill was scrolling through, but fantastic resource if you're just getting started. It's explained as you would explain to children, but it's still extremely useful as you learn the technologies that eBPF works with. And then Bill, I'll let you wrap this up.
Sure, yeah. I guess the last thing that I would close with is right back what I said at the beginning. Like, I'm here as a resource for the community. So if there's something that I can do, an idea you have, or you want to get connected to someone else, I'm happy to do that. My goal is to connect different people and grow the community. So please reach out if I can be at all helpful to you.
Fantastic. All right, so that is it, folks. Thank you all so much for joining us on episode 3 of the eBPF Book Club. We have at least a couple more episodes coming up. Keep an eye on all the socials. We'll advertise them as we'll start streaming them again. But thank you all for joining. You folks take care and see you on the next one.